And that nigun will continue to make its way throughout our Shabbat. But we're going to dive into a little bit of text this afternoon, if you don't mind. Ask ourselves the question, the pivotal roles in the moments of the highs and lows of life. So before we dive into two particular narratives in Tanakh that are going to explore that very question, I'm going to ask you to take a moment and just reflect for yourself. Can you think of a moment in which song was part of what punctuated a particularly emotional moment in your own life? And this could be a beautiful, positive moment. This might be a simcha or a celebration or an accomplishment or a moment of joy. It might have been a moment of grief or sorrow or challenge or pain. But a moment with significant emotional experience in which song, doesn't have to be Jewish, song played a particularly strong role in punctuating that moment. Just take a moment to think about it. I'm wondering, would anyone like to be willing to share their moment? Yes.
I'm finding recently that we
Beautiful. So just to reflect that back a little for everyone here and for those tuning in at home, the song being a moment that kind of marks return. You're hearing people singing again in school, which is a sign of life, a sign of togetherness. And I felt that as well here today in Shul. Song marking moments of return and of vibrancy and community. Beautiful. Yes.
songs are constantly running through my head, making connections. But one of the most emotional things I've had in the last few years is seeing and hearing that Obama's first inaugural, Bruce Springsteen and Pete Seeger playing and singing the Spanish Yearling. I saw it fairly recently, watched it over and over again. Each time I cry, and each time I think, I actually wrote to Bruce Springsteen. Get the band back together and let us sing together.
Beautiful, thank you. So song in a moment that punctuated a feeling of communal hope. The song in that moment at Obama's, especially ordination, oh my goodness, it's on my mind. He's welcome. Obama's inauguration, thank you. Obama's inauguration, a moment of communal hope, and song was the underscored that moment. Yes. Anyone else? Yes.
I have a historical one. In 1948 or 49, Israel was prayer. My father, who was in Chabad and all this stuff, Zionist, he was singing Telazakna out the window of our apartment in the Bronx. And in Talbot Lawn or everywhere else. And we also made a flag. Now, this is the one that's not the flag, symbolic flag with a wreath on the side, and made it out of whatever cloth. Really big, and hung it out the window and sang that. I remember that. 1949.
Wow, beautiful. So in that example, song was the tool that connected across national boundaries and into the hearts of communal identity, brought together the identity of those in the United States and those in Israel celebrating and feeling connected to their identity together. Song was the connective tool. Beautiful. Any other shares? Yeah.
Chaos.
Beautiful. So listening to music during a moment like being in labor or any other moment of, you said chaos, intensity, or transition, newness. Music has both a comfort, but also a marking of that transition in time. Yes, anyone else? Yes.
Before my mother died, she just had a stroke. And all of a sudden, I remember it's all
Song as a tool for memory, even when memories start to fade, song brings us back. Thank you. And was there another?
building on that, not what I was going to say, but sang in a choir before COVID. Nursing homes, something like that, people with severe memory issues. Yeah, saying something they recognize that like they can't quite. What I was going to say though is when we were at Yosemite National Park, walking around all the time. Came out.
Beautiful. So song, not only as a tool for expressing the wonder of the world, but to go even a layer deeper, the texts and the prayers of our tradition holding the words of wonder that perhaps are the exact words we want to offer when we feel that wonder, and song is the container. Beautiful. So there are, thousands and thousands of examples. Song, as we saw, really punctuates these moments of highs and lows, and as you said, chaos and confusion and memory and hope. So we're going to transition into looking at two particular narratives in Tanakh in which this outpouring of song is truly at the center. They are very different narratives, as we will soon see, and the title of this class is, of course, Singing at the Sea, Lamenting by the River. So some of you might already have a guess as to which narratives we will be exploring. And if you don't, you will about to find out. So coming around are going to be our source sheets. We'll just sing a bit as they come around so that we all land in the same place. Does everyone have one? Beautiful. So the first source we're going to look at is possibly one of the most sort of well-known moments of song in our Torah, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the moment in which through this experience, song poured out. So you'll see on the first side of your source sheet, two particular moments from Exodus 15 that show moments of song. And I'm going to ask you to find a chavritza, find a study partner, I'm just so thrilled to be able to say that rather than say I'll put you into breakout rooms. And spend a few minutes, and you could be with one person, two people, three people, maybe meet someone you don't know yet. And I'm going to ask you to look at these two sets of texts together. And by two sets, I mean the two chunks of Exodus 15 on the first page. Don't turn over your sheet yet. And you're going to look at the questions on the bottom of the page and any other questions you might have, of course. I would never dare to limit questions in a Jewish learning space. But if you look together at the bottom, you'll see what is the role of singing in this particular scene? Where do we see power and where do we see powerlessness? Does music play a role in the expression of power and powerlessness? And then the last question I'd love for you to discuss with your chavruta. Are there other moments in the Jewish or in the broader human story that come to mind when considering the dynamics of power and powerlessness as expressed in the above texts? So take some time, and I hope you have some good learning and discussion. You'll know it's time to come back together because I'll start to sing. So just a reminder, we're just sticking to the first side of the page. Great. So I'd love to hear some of what you discussed. Really any of these questions or anything else that came up for you in your Chavruta. What's going on here? Where do we see power? Where do we see powerlessness? What other stories come to mind? And most importantly, what is the role of singing here? Who wants to begin?
I did sort of researching the subject of human prayers.
Louder, please.
I've been researching the subject of women leading prayers in Judaism, and taken Miriam as the first woman she spontaneously took the agency as whoever was God gave her the power and that she took on herself and I love the prayer. The prayer of thanksgiving.
Beautiful, thank you. So we are seeing here in this text, music as a tool for enhanced agency. And if you join me tonight, we'll be unpacking Miriam's song a little bit further through a new melody. But indeed, the song is an example of increased agency here. Thank you. Yeah.
Something that we discussed in night Versa was that, like, you know, the difference between the first passage and the second. The first passage, you know, we're digesting like what just happened. You know, we just crossed, we just all we just by the way, and are sort of using music as a means to process that information. And then the second passage, when Miriam they sing along the same words, and you know, giant gloriously, more bread, and so to see, we've now digested and processed that, you know, that those words. So it's sort of music as a means of like unpacking experience.
Thank you. So Emily's noticing the sort of internal spiraling of the story from the first two verses to then these next two verses, and music sort of both bridging the gap and being the vehicle for processing the experience. Thank you. Other reflections from your Chavruta? Yeah.
I could answer the last question about powerlessness, story, and it brought to my mind that the legacy of the songs that were sung in concentration camps. So I thought of fast soldiers that Tutsi were saying, and also those people that were saying, I'm not you. And I think that that's a way that people can assert their identity and needs, even when they're in a position or similar to the slaves in the United States that sing work songs also bring camaraderie.
Beautiful, thank you. So naming both the experience of those in the concentration camps and also slaves in the United States as two examples of marginalized, oppressed peoples with close to or completely no power, right? And song being a way to assert some, coming back to this question of agency, song being a way to hold some power, hold some agency over the experience, hold some power over one's own identity, right? Song represents who we are. And the Jews in the camps, the slaves in the US, and every other story of a marginalized people, I think we can almost always find song, moments of song as expressions of power in moments of powerlessness. Thank you. Yes.
So I have a little trouble with the second one in the sense that somebody has another interpretation, but Miriam went out with a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out with her in dance with timbrels, and Miriam chanted for them as if they were silent, and she's the only one who could speak. She's the only one who was allowed, and their voices were silent. When I think about the Debbie Christian song,
And the wind dancing with their timbrels followed Miriam back. She sang her song. It's a great song.
And where is there, she's singing, I'm saying to the Lord, but we don't do that. So do they sing later on in the text, or are they?
Great, so that's a great question, and I just to fine tune your question a little bit further, you're noticing, if we look at the Hebrew, you're noticing Vatan Lahem Miriam. So Lahem, that word Lahem is being translated in this version as for them, which it is not clear in this text what for them means, right? It could be as you offered, for them as in totally on their behalf, they were silent and she did it literally as a representative. It could also be like a shaliach tzibur, right? We call a shaliach tzibur literally translated into English, that is a messenger or representative or emissary of the tzibur, of the community. And yet, I hope, when the shaliach tzibur ta'an lahem, when the shaliach tzibur sings or chants or speaks or leads on behalf of the community, ideally, the community is not silent, right? So I think it is an open question whether or not in this moment it's they were silent and she was on their behalf, or when I was the shaliach tzibur this morning, you were so beautifully singing. I like to read it as communally, and she was serving as the shaliach, but I think it's a great question. Yes, it's certainly significantly more explicit. And that is I think that's an important question to be asking. Yes.
I just want to say that following up on that, so like the traditional, there's a whole there and new prayer, because you can't bring the whole congregation response, call them response. And that is how I interpret it. She's saying, and she sings a line where it's a very common song.
Certainly, we still have that today embedded in our prayer, right? The Kedusha is a wonderful example. It's one of my favorite dynamics in communal prayer, are not just the moments where we're singing together, but the moments where if I, as the Shaliach Tzibor, have my job, and you as the Kahal have your job, and you say, Yimloch Adonai le'olam l'ha'aretz l'dor, hallelujah, and then I say, l'dor v'dor nagid v'lecha. It's like a conversation. So that's another beautiful way to look at it, is perhaps she was modeling this moment of conversation in communal prayer.
But they weren't all women.
They weren't.
They weren't all female, because it's on our head. So if there were only women.
So that's actually a grammatical feature where sometimes the masculine ending is used for all women. It's in biblical Hebrew. It's not yes sometimes. So that's not. I think interestingly, I think we could have a midrashic reading, like a creative interpretation, where if we wanted to, and I'm sure many have done this, where if we wanted to kind of tease out where the patriarchy continues to exist, even in moments of great women's leadership empowerment. I think we could do a nice grammatical midrash on the fact that the word is lahem. But from a technical standpoint, sometimes lahem in Tanakh is used even for women. So it's like a yet and. I think that's an important reading. So yeah. So modern Hebrew also will sometimes use the masculine plural for women, unless one is trying to make a point about women. So we do sometimes in modern Hebrew conversation use, yeah. So it's complicated, yeah. Yes.
I looked at this part a little differently in that Miriam starts sentence. I see the timbrel, and she starts to give a rhythm that the other women then adapt and dance to. And it's not unusual, I think, and I've seen like a Mexican dancing. There's somebody who's singing the song, the melody, and then all the dancers are enthusiastically dancing. So I don't know
right? So there's a lot of different modalities of participation happening here, right? There's the instruments, there's the dancing, there's the physical act of going out, which is also like mobilization, which is also participation. Yeah.
What I pull from this is that the song comes forth and bringing over unconceivable lives and passions of life. Comes forth from this, and then even spilling into the disturbing thing of celebrating the death of others. It doesn't go to your eyes, but I understand where it comes forth from.
Great, thank you. I wanna dwell on this for a minute, right? This sense of relief, as you put it so beautifully, that we see in both sections, right? Both sections end with this song that is being sung that names both unbridled joy at the moment of redemption and also names the downfall and destruction of the enemy, right? And when I imagine this being sung, I imagine that the sense of relief and anticipation of freedom and of redemption is so overwhelming that in that moment, the joy of redemption isn't enough to name. They also had to name the downfall of the enemy, which is complex, right? They don't just say, this is God, I will enshrine God, hooray. There's also this naming of horse and driver has been hurled into the sea, right? There has to be the naming of the downfall of the enemy to really capture the relief being felt in this moment. Song captures not just the joy, but song is here also capturing the memory of the powerlessness, the memory of the pain that is still very present. If it wasn't so present, they wouldn't be saying that, right? Any other thoughts? Yes.
I wanted to raise a thought, not so much about these texts, but about another text. When your last question sort of spurred it on in my mind, and that's maybe about the powerlessness of song itself. Because in Yishmat Kol Chai, we say, "Ilu Malay Shira." Even if our lips were filled, mouths were filled with song, we would not be able to thank God for 1/1000th of a thousandth of the goodness that He's done for us. So I think that is sort of maybe acknowledging the limits of our ability to appreciate everything in the world.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Song is a way to, as you just said, acknowledge the limits, our limitations. Beautiful. And I love that text. Thank you. So speaking of song representing limitlessness in some ways, that's actually a great transition to our next text. Thank you. So I invite you to turn over your source sheet. And to the other side, you'll see we have a very different song narrative. We have a selection from Psalm 137 by the rivers of Babylon, all in Harotz Babel. This is a well-known psalm that has had many, many musical settings of it across faith traditions. And we're going to study this again in Chavruta, asking the same questions. What is the role of singing in this scene? So again, just to situate ourselves in the scene, this is exile. This is when the Israelites existed in exile from their land. What is the role of singing in this scene? Where do we see power and where do we see powerlessness? Does music play a role in the expression of power and powerlessness? And are there other moments in the Jewish and human story that come to mind when considering these dynamics? So just as a little, I won't call it a spoiler alert, but a little something to give you. For question number 1, there are many, many answers to question number 1. Singing plays a bunch of different roles in the scene. So with your Chavruta, try to catch them all. What are the different roles music, song play here? Music, song, instruments, what are the roles? So go ahead and turn to your Chavruta. We'll come back together in a few minutes. All right. So before we do like a full diving into this text, I want to really start with that first question, which is, as I think I overheard many of you unpacking, what is the role of singing in this scene? There's a whole bunch. So who'd like to get us started? Yes, please.
The tool of torment by the people they call our captors, our tormentors.
Great. So we see here song. This is one of the ways song shows up here. as a tool of torment and humiliation, which is quite striking here and very different from our first text. Yes, they say, our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. It's very, very vivid. What other role does singing play? Yeah. Great. So here, not singing is a tool. While singing might have been like this tool of declaring autonomy and power in the first text we looked at. Here it's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And that's how I preserve some kind of sense of power in this powerless situation. What other roles do we see song or music or singing play?
Expression of both joy and normality. They're very nice on it. Part of the repertoire.
Great. So it's the loss of song shows sort of a loss of, as you said, normalcy and also memory, right? Song is part of losing that memory. Yeah. Other ways we see song here. Yes, please.
I've never noticed the other days of the but I've never noticed before the
Yes, so noticing that it's very striking here that the tormentors asked them to sing and song being a way of, as was already said, humiliation, but also entertainment that those in that position of powerlessness don't feel is deserving of the oppressors. What else do we see? Yes.
Well, you could imagine that when the tormentors weren't around, that they would sing.
Beautiful. So I think that's really important to note that possibly implicit in this text is actually the power of song, the beauty of song, the way song connects us to our memory, right? It says here, how can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? So it implied there is that song is something special for moments of devotion and connection and memory and love, and in its absence, how can we do it? But perhaps that's what will bring its presence. Beautiful. Yes.
I guess I felt like what they did was say, the tormentors can't sing a song of that. So we're making a new song, a song of Exile. And that became a song of 2000 in part of the tradition. Remember, Jerusalem. They made a new song.
Great. So we see here that song also plays the role of reconfiguring of identity. And all of this business of we can't sing and singing is torment and we won't do it is all embedded in a song, right? It's a psalm. It's a Psalm 137 is a song of exile, right? And as I said, there are so many melodies across faith traditions for this very song that talks about song as something we just cannot do under these circumstances. Yes. Beautiful, so important. Thank you that this verse here, verse 5, if I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. If I do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour, right? There's actually a commitment to sing embedded in there. That song, this thing that connects us to the memory of what we've lost. We actually have to do it all the time, no matter what. Thank you so much. I saw a hand back there.
I was going to say that same thing. I was thinking about nostalgia and that even like it's incredibly sad when we cry, we get together with the people who knew the thing that we lost, and you still want to sing that song and you still want to cry and you still want to feel that grief, even though you don't have that, you know, if you don't have that thing anymore, you should get over it or whatever, but you can't. All you want to do is sort of lock it and praise it and breathe.
Beautiful, thank you. And we see in both this text and in the first text we look at that the emotions felt in joyful moments are not purely joyful. And the emotions felt in moments of grief are so multi-layered. And song is the container for all of that. Yes.
The reason that we start in camps.
Yeah.
It would seem that there was a pattern of agency for people. They continue.
Beautiful, thank you for bringing that up. So in Theresienstadt, in the Theresian ghetto, it's actually a very parallel situation we see here. The Nazis actually said to the prisoners, we need you to perform the Verdi Requiem for the Red Cross. The Red Cross is going to come visit and check that, everything is great here. And you're going to perform. The captors said, you are going to sing for our amusement. You're going to perform. And the piece that the prisoners performed, the Verdi Requiem, if anyone is familiar, I actually sang it for the first time here at the University of Michigan in Hill Auditorium. Very, very powerful for me. They sang a famous piece from the Verdi Requiem called the Dies Irae, the Day of Wrath. And in this moment, these prisoners stood and sang to their captors that the day of wrath would come. So in some ways, this was a little bit of like a Psalm 137 moment, right? They're being told by their oppressors, by their captors, like sing literally for our amusement. And they turned around and they sang. What did they sing? And there's a foundation called the Defiant Requiem Foundation that explores this history really deeply. Yes.
I was just thinking, not from our discussion, just thinking about all the parts of our tradition that remember everything in song. And I'm thinking in particular of Mickey Love. And that we have particular tunes for those Mickey Love, that some of the Mickey Love are more joy in them than others. Some really stress or more unhappy times, but they've always done with particular tune to help us both to help us remember and also we don't just read it.
Absolutely. So there's a variety of reasons why we chant all of our texts from Torah to Tanakh to our prayers. But one of those reasons is as a mnemonic device, as a way to remember the texts, as memory, collective memory of both the literal words and the ways of continuing to transmit them to our community, l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation. So I think we're going to pause here, as I believe we are at 2:00, and I want everyone to have an opportunity to rest and rejuvenate before we gather again here tonight at 7:30 for Havdalah and some singing. But my hope is that as we continue to sing tonight and continue to come back to Shul and Shabbat and sing with one another, that you allow the song to play whatever role it needs to play in the highs and lows of your own life. So let's just take a moment and sing our Nigun one more time and then say Shabbat Shalom. Yiram Baya. Yeah.